series of Money Talk sessions, which have been generously sponsored by Manningham Council and presented to you here by Women's Health East. And today's session is about your money mindset. My name is Annette Rudd, and as you can see, I am from Women's Health East, and I'm the project lead for Women's Financial Independence. So I would like to start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I want to pay my respects to their elders past and present, to any emerging leaders, and to any Aboriginal people that are listening in from around the country today. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My co-host, who is from Women's Health East, Rachel So, is hidden behind the screen. She is actually going to be checking in on any questions that you might have as we go along in our chat with Natasha. So if you do have questions, we would ask that you pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom, or depending on where it is on your screen, there should be a Q&A box where you can enter questions. And we'll be looking to answer those from about 1 o'clock. If for any reason that's not working for you, please feel free to use the chat. We'll also look in there. We'll be making a video recording of this available for all of our registrants, and you'll receive an email about that after the event. Now, what I just want to mention is that the information in this session is general in nature, and that all of these sessions are designed to empower you with knowledge to make great financial decisions. But if you need personal financial advice, the best thing to do is to contact somebody who is qualified to give you that sort of advice. So I thought I'd just start with a bit of a background about why Women's Health East, in partnership with Manningham Council, developed this series of Money Talk sessions. So if you're tuning in today, you're probably really well aware of the big financial shake-up the pandemic has had. And it's had a really significant impact on women. In fact, the latest Australian Bureau of Statistics data tells us that it's women who are losing out in terms of employment. In fact, in Victoria, 8.7% of women have lost their full-time jobs compared to about 6.7% of men. And women have lost part-time jobs, casual jobs, so on all measures, women are losing employment. But women are also actually in the industries most impacted by the pandemic. So, you know, the essential services, such as health and education and retail. So many women may find that they've lost part-time or full-time jobs, but then there are others who are under extra pressure on the front line providing services to the general public, you know, whether it's in aged care or in supermarkets or in hospitals. At the same time, of course, a lot of us have been extra busy at home doing extra caregiving around homeschooling. We're still doing that here in Victoria in stage 4 lockdown. And again, early studies from the Australian Institute of Family Studies has found that women are doing that at greater rates than men. And that's not too dissimilar to rates of unpaid care we had pre-COVID. So look, that all sounds pretty gloomy. And facing this kind of uncertain environment can be really stressful. And one thing we know that can help is to be, I guess, aware of how we manage our anxiety about our money. And if we can get that in check, and particularly if we can become more aware of habits that we have around finances that might be working against us, we'll be better off. So for that reason, I'm very excited that we've got Natasha Janssens from Women with Sense along to talk today about money mindsets and money stories, and specifically what having a really positive money mindset can do to help you navigate these times. Now, Natasha is the author of the current #1 bestseller on the Amazon Personal Money Management list for her book, which is called Wonder Woman's Guide to Money, The Busy Woman's Guide to Money Management and Wealth Building. And Natasha tells me that as of today, due to an admin error by Amazon, it's currently available for less than $1 on Kindle. So you might want to check that out after today. That is quite a bargain. Natasha is a licensed financial planner, accountant, and mortgage broker. So she's like the triple threat of money, as well as a qualified behavioural money coach, and her business focuses specifically on helping women improve their relationship with money and create wealth. So welcome, Natasha. So lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much, Annette. It's such a pleasure. And you know, I want to say thank you to the council as well for such a fantastic initiative. There's never been a more important time for us to support the community,
Yeah,
especially in relation to money, with so many people feeling the pinch.
absolutely. So Natasha, you have a really interesting story, which I've heard a little bit about, but I would love for you to tell us more about yourself and how you came to be a financial educator for women.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a tale of adventure. You know, despite my accent, I'm not a born Aussie. So I actually came from the old Yugoslavia, and I fled the war 3 weeks after my 18th birthday. And through a string of circumstances, found myself sort of crossing the border and being literally locked out and separated from my family. And, you know, taking it one step at a time, found myself fulfilling my dream of actually someday getting to live and stay in Australia. So I came to Australia, I studied, I had to, you know, build my life from the ground up, and literally had to hit the ground running when I got here because I had no, you know, no family and no access to financial support. So I had to work and pay my way through. So coming from a background where war and poverty and instability was such a big theme, you know, money was always, I was always fascinated by it. And I wanted to learn more, especially being in a foreign country, about how I could be smarter with my money and how I could, you know, navigate things. So I became an accountant. And, you know, over the years, what started really to break my heart was that we live in such a fortunate country. We hear it so much. Australia is the lucky country. You know, it's one of the wealthiest nations in the world. Yet I had so many clients that were still feeling stressed about money. They were still treading water, feeling like they weren't getting anywhere. They weren't feeling fulfilled with their lives and what they were doing. And I thought, gosh, well, you know, I want to do something with this gift that I've been given of getting to come to Australia. I want to, you know, have some meaning in all of this and make a contribution. So I decided to become a licensed financial advisor, a mortgage broker, and all those sorts of things, just so I could help people manage their money better. Now, it wasn't always my intention to work specifically with women, but, you know, life will often have other plans for us. So a couple of months after registering my business, I fell pregnant. And so just through going through that experience, I started to network more with my mother's groups. This was, you know, 2014. Facebook groups were just starting to become a thing. And what I noticed was that women wanted financial support. They wanted financial advice and guidance, but they didn't know where to turn. So they were turning to Facebook groups and mothers groups to sort of ask each other for advice. Now, the thing with financial planning is, as you may know, is heavily male dominated, which meant that there was no qualified professionals in these groups to help facilitate the conversation and make sure that what these women were telling each other was actually factually correct or appropriate. So with the input of my mother's group, I said, how about we set up a separate group that's dedicated specifically to talking about money? And it just started to grow from there. We started to do face-to-face workshops. Then, you know, demand started coming in from women from interstate saying, well, you know, we're not in Canberra, how can we participate? And then other women joining and saying, well, I'm not a mum, but can I join in as well? And that was really how Women with Sense came to be, and, you know, was founded in January of 2016. And here we are today.
Wow, that is amazing. What an incredible story. And I think you've got quite a lot of people in that group now. It's about 10,000 in that group.
So look, overall through the newsletter and, you know, Instagram and Facebook, we've got a little over 8,000 subscribers, and we have a private members only group that's a little over 1,300 members. So we're very selective about who we let in, because it's the sort of group that I want to be supportive. You know, we don't want people in there that are trying to pitch you investments or anything like that. So we don't let just anyone in. It's only people who are committed to their financial journey and their progress.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I guess some of the things I've been thinking about recently in terms of money and in my role, really looking at the structural barriers in the way society operates that put us as women behind when it comes to money. So, you know, I'm thinking about things like the fact that women earn less money than men, and a whole range of things contribute to that, such as the fact that women work in less well-paid industries and earn less even in management positions. And I'm thinking also of the gender pay gap, which is now 14%. So the gender pay gap is the difference between men and women's weekly average earnings. And we know that, you know, that 14% potentially is probably going to get bigger with the impact of the pandemic. And of course, women are also more likely to be out of the workforce when we're having kids and families, and that puts our superannuation behind when we don't contribute and our retirement savings behind. So how do you see that playing out with the women that you're working with? What are some of your experiences there?
Well, look, and that's why I titled the book Wonder Woman's Guide to Money, because I feel that the modern day woman is your modern day Wonder Woman, and she's stuck between a rock and a hard place where we now are expected, and living standards are such that we have to be working, we have to be financially sustainable and independent, but by the same token we're still held to outdated norms about what is a woman's role in society. And so there's still a lot of those responsibilities that fall primarily to us, like looking after the kids, like looking after sick and elderly parents and relatives and all of that. So at the end of the day, then something ends up having to give. And usually that something is financial management. So while we may in the household be the ones that are the primary spenders and will look after the day-to-day budget on groceries and that sort of stuff, we tend to disengage with the bigger picture stuff, like things like our superannuation, things like thinking about and learning about investing and growing our money. And that, to be honest, that surprised me when I first spoke to the Women with Sense Network as to what was their biggest obstacle. And most of them said, look, it's the mental load. Because at the end of the day, I feel too exhausted to want to learn about something or even think about something else. But the other thing is as well is, we've been conditioned to prioritize the urgent over the important. And it's, human nature. It's that whole saying of the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And for us, most of the time that squeaky wheel is, the kids asking, Mum, what's for dinner? And what am I wearing to school tomorrow? And all that sort of stuff. So it makes it really easy to go, well, I'm really busy right now, or I'm exhausted right now. I'll think about my super, that's down the track. I'll go and deal with that later. But the problem is that if we're not careful about it, later never comes. Now, what does that mean for us? It means that, first of all, when we're disengaged with money as a topic and with managing a day-to-day, first of all, our confidence will take a hit. It starts to become, things like super and investing and taxation, they start to feel like foreign languages because it's not something we deal with on a regular basis. So what do? We then procrastinate. And suddenly that mental load becomes our justification for, well, I want to deal with that, but I'm just a little bit busy right now. So our confidence takes a hit. It makes it really easy for us then to second guess any decision. And so we enter analysis paralysis. But it then also makes it easy for other people to take advantage of us by selling us misinformation or risky investments. It makes it easy for us to be subjected to financial abuse. And what I found interesting is that a lot of women, it's not until they approach separation and, trying to get a divorce that they even realize that they were subjected to financial abuse, because it becomes really easy to sort of go, oh, well, he just looks after that side of things and I look after this and this is how it works. That we don't even realize that we're slowly been starting to get frozen out of things. So there's a whole range then of implications for women, and we're seeing the trend sadly emerging now with women in their mid-50s that are leading the rates of homelessness as well. So that paints a picture of the risks that we face if we prioritize the unpaid workload and we forego our financial independence as far as our ability to earn our own income. Unless as a couple, there has been a great deal of wealth accumulated and trust along the way and all the rest, the risk that we face is that we're now approaching retirement and we have no fallback plan. We have no superannuation. We have no ability to earn our income because we've been out of the workforce for 20 years and it makes it really hard to re-enter. So there's all those challenges that come into it. So that's why I'm so passionate about more women sharing their stories and experiences together, because once we're aware of the path that we're on, then it makes it so much easier for us to do things to start to correct it. And for us to go, you know what, actually someone else can handle the laundry. Who cares if the whites and the colors are mixed? It's not the end of the world. I've got something more important to do. I'm going to look into my super.
That's great. I guess I'm interested too to talk with you a bit about the messaging that we get in childhood. So some of the things that lead to what you've been talking about in terms of how we're raised, how girls and boys are raised differently, and the different sorts of messages that we pick up. So what do you see as the differences between the way girls and boys are raised in terms of money that might contribute to developing certain money stories for yourself?
Yeah, look, it's really fascinating. So the stories and habits that we develop in childhood, and we'll talk about this more, influence both men and women as the way that we manage our money, but especially for women. Now, I'm an only child, and when I came to Australia, I had a lot of male mentors. So for a long time, I struggled to sort of figure out, why is it that women have this self-consciousness and lack of confidence, and, you know, and we sort of buy into this belief that we're good at spending money and all that sort of stuff. And it wasn't until I had kids, and I'm fortunate enough to have a son and a daughter, that I started to realize the societal differences and that subconscious messaging that starts from a very early age. So to give you an example, both my son and my daughter as toddlers, you know, same as any kid, they want to be a grown-up as quickly as they can. And these days with tap and go, it makes it really easy for them to help to pay for things. So both of them loved, you know, they couldn't wait to get to the cash register and tap the card to be able to pay for the groceries or whatever it is. And so for my son, who was the firstborn, the messages were always, wow, aren't you clever? You're such a good helper for your mummy, you know, all this, you know, really positive stuff. And then when my daughter was born, I remember one particular incident. I was at a cafe and I had Emma on my hip and I went to pay for the coffee. And the guy at the counter, because Emma, you know, wanted to pay as well. And the guy at the counter said to her, he goes, oh, you're going to be good at spending mummy and daddy's money. Girls are good spenders. I should know. I have 3. And now he didn't mean anything by it, but it's a message that I heard time and time again. So Nick was being told, you know, how smart he is, how capable he is. And Emma was already being conditioned that she's a spender. Like, that's the role that girls play. And it's the same way that we will instinctively give boys tools and cars and things to play with. But for girls, it's sort of, here's the kitchen and the broom and all that sort of stuff. And that's why I believe that we have, on the one hand, made huge advances in a short space of time. If you look at how quickly we've adapted to technology, you know, social media and all the rest. Yet I'm always fascinated by, why are some of these gendered differences? Why is the pay gap so slow to shift? And I believe it's because of just what we're messaging, what we're role modeling to both girls and boys. So it's not enough for us to talk about, this is how you can be and this is what you should do and all the rest. Kids learn by monkey see, monkey do. So if they see mum is the one to drop everything to come and pick me up from school if I'm sick, or mum is the one that's not working, or mum is the one that's always looking after the laundry and all the rest, then both boys and girls will start to pick that up. So what we have to now is be really aware of what behavior we're modeling for the next generation and start to shift that and go, you know what, let's let go of some of that load. And it's a hard thing for women to do because we have been conditioned again to have to be perfect. You look at so many magazines and things, it was all about, how do you be the perfect housewife? How do you have the perfect home? So it's hard for us to let go of responsibility because it's like, well, then it won't be done right. It won't be done perfectly. I may as well do it myself. So we have to work on that and go, you know what, done is better than perfect. Just let someone step in and do it. It doesn't matter. Toasted sandwiches for dinner, no problems. Just let it go. Give yourself that permission to let it go. Let someone else step in so you can look after you, both physically and mentally, but financially as well.
Yeah, and I'm thinking too around messaging children get from their parents. So from what I've been reading, boys are more likely to hear or to I guess, get some education from their parents, particularly their dads, around investment. Whereas in these studies, women are reflecting that when they were girls, they would either not get any education from parents, or if they did, it would tend to be around budgeting. Yeah. So is that something that you sort of see with some of the women that you're working with as well?
Yeah, and look, and it makes sense. Again, if you go back to it, you know, men and boys were conditioned that it's their job to be the breadwinner. It's their job to bring the money in and to look after the money and to provide. So you can start to see why they were taught, how do you grow this money? How do you look after it? Whereas women were taught, you know, be seen but not heard. You know, your place is look after, you know, how the house looks and, you know, what we're going to eat for dinner and that sort of stuff. So there was another study and someone was saying to me, oh, isn't this positive as far as the gender differences, because women now have more say in the home that they're going to buy. But to me, all I could see is that, again, yes, we were having more say, but it's, again, in that domestic space. It's like, well, you're the one who'll be looking after it. So here you go, you pick where we're going to live. But we're not really, you know, in a lot of cases being involved with things about, well, how are we going to invest our money? Where is everything? How are we structuring it all? And all that sort of stuff. So we have to then consciously realize that this is how we were taught, and this is why we might have a fear of learning about investing or taxation, or an inclination to avoid it. But to realize that a lot of what we were taught, not just about our standing in society, but about money, which we'll explore in a minute, is outdated. It doesn't apply today. So we need to let go of that so that we can start to prosper and progress further.
So it sounds like a really good segue into maybe you telling us a little bit about money stories. I know it's an area that you specialise in. In particular, you know, how we develop our money story and how it impacts our ability to approach our finances.
So there's an entire field of research dedicated to this called behavioral finance or behavioral economics, where scientists have been looking at human psychology, especially when it comes to making financial decisions and managing their money. So first of all, one of the reasons why in Australia so many people struggle to be better with money is because we focus too much on that money IQ side of things, which is the whole knowing how to budget, knowing the theory of investing, all that sort of stuff. But research has found that that's only actually a small portion of what we do with money. The majority of what dictates how we manage our money is our subconscious mind, which is in actual fact our emotions, our habits, our biases, our instinctive responses like our fear response and all the rest. That actually plays a far greater role. Now, if we take a look at things like our emotions and our habits about money, stop and think about where all of that came from. You know, all of us learned about money from the grown-ups in our lives, from observing what was going on around us. And in most cases, there was no context to it. No one was really talking to us to explain things about what was going on. We were just seeing things happen and then responding to it or repeating. We want to be like our parents, so we repeat what they've said and what they've done. So if we saw mum and dad always fight over money or be stressed about money, we're likely to then have that sort of instinctive response as well, to be, quick to have an argument or to freak out about it. If we heard mum and dad saying, we don't have enough money, or I don't know where the money's coming from, or money doesn't grow on trees, all of that is actually going to stick with us. We don't even realize it, but we start to then repeat that behavior as adults. So what we have to do is start to put it in context and to recognize what are the things that we were taught about money that actually don't apply. Because if you stop and think about it, so you learn about money from your parents and your grandparents, they learned about it from their parents and their grandparents and so forth. So, but money in its current form is actually very, very new. I mean, consider your grandmother or great-grandmother, they could never have even imagined that there was such a thing as a gig economy, right? Or that you could purchase a slice of a company and get a passive income. That didn't exist. They couldn't even imagine that something like that was possible. So it makes sense that they were teaching us, coming from a time of war and recession and all of that, to go, well, money is a limited resource. And for them, happiness was closely tied to money because it was about survival. But then what happens when we live in a time of prosperity, when we live at a time where, rather than having to work really hard to have that dream home, you can go and get a loan from the bank and you can instantly get that perception of success about the car or the home and what you want. So we have to recognize that the definition of wealth is outdated, that the definition of how we measure happiness is outdated as well. And it's no longer material things. It's no longer, just about the type of house that we have or how much money we earn. Because again, research has found that only brings us extra happiness up to a certain point, which is basically up to the point where our basic needs are fulfilled, where you have a safe place to sleep, you have food on the table, all of that. Once those needs are met, everything else, as much as you spend your money on the fancy holiday or, and I've lived through this, I've learned it firsthand about buying into that message about, well, I need to dress a certain way, I need to drive a certain car, all these things are going to bring me happiness. None of that applies, and it only brings us incremental happiness. It brings us happiness. It's a bit like, the Mars bar, because I love chocolate, it gives me a temporary fix and a temporary sort of boost. And it's not long before, I'm seeking that sugar hit again in another way. And the same applies to us in retail therapy. So there is so much in our habits and our responses to money that we have been taught that have turned into habits, things that we do on autopilot without even thinking twice about it, that just doesn't apply anymore. So if we want to break free and start to be creating wealth in the modern day and age, we need to recognize things that we do that no longer apply, things that we buy into and believe that aren't true, that is something that someone else told us. You know, I remember even in primary school, being a kid in Yugoslavia, I was the new kid in the school, and one of the kids stole the test and got busted and then blamed it on me somehow. But the teacher pulled my parents aside and said, nothing is ever going to come of home. Right? So there's all those stories that we get as kids that then stay with us. And if we buy into them and believe them, it's like, well, okay, I can't. This is as good as it gets. I can't. I had parents who had alcohol addiction. I can't create a better life for me. This is my story and my path. Or, you know, I can't. It's just not possible for me. I'm too busy looking after everyone else. I don't have the time, I don't have the skills, I don't have the intellect to go and create the career that I want. You know, I'd love to have a beautiful house on the beach, but that just is never possible for me. We need to recognize that and stop that in its tracks. Go, you know what, that was someone else's story. That does not apply to me. Look at Oprah, look at every successful person. None of them were born into wealth. None of them, the only thing that separates them from everyone else is that they refuse to believe the negative talk. And they're just focused on putting one foot in front of the other. And that's literally all you have to do.
So have you got some tips on how we change those kind of habits that we've developed around our money story?
Yeah, look, the first one is you have to start to recognize it. So now that's easier said than done, because again, we live at a time where we're conditioned to be out of touch with ourselves. Like, we're tuned into everything else. Just consider, you know, at work, you're focused on what's going on there. When you come home, how do we unwind? We plug into our phones, we read social media, or we might watch Netflix or something like that. We don't spend time actually feeling in touch with ourselves and how we're feeling and what's going on for us. So starting point is to get into a habit every single day, just to notice what you're experiencing. So if you're feeling stressed or anxious, start to, when we talk about the onion, you know, with peeling the layers off, start to dig further into it and go, okay, what am I feeling anxious about? What am I feeling afraid of? And peel it further and further. If you're afraid about potentially losing your job, go, okay, well, what am I afraid might happen if I lose my job? Well, it might be hard to find a new one. Okay. And what do I think might happen then? So you want to keep going further and further until you identify it. Then you want to look at, how do you respond when you feel upset or overwhelmed or stressed or anxious? You know, again, we saw it through the pandemic. You know, how many people have developed a habit of going and having a drink? Right? Because we go, that becomes our coping mechanism. Where did we learn that from? Again, other people around us, right? So it's these habits that come into it. There's others that have gone into retail therapy and gone, well, I'm going to go and buy something for the house, or I'll go and get takeaway to support local business. So we're really good at justifying why we're doing it. So there's that plausible deniability, but these are the habits. So you want to identify what it is that you're doing. And then the third step is we need to reframe and shift it. So I often give the example of having a glass of wine after work. So if my response to a bad day at work is to have a glass of wine at the end of the day, once in a while, not a problem. If I start to feel stressed at work every single day, then I start to come home every single day and I have a glass of wine after work. And over time, if that happens enough, I'm now going to come home from work and have a glass of wine, regardless of whether or not I had a bad day at work. And the same thing applies to every other aspect of our lives, which is all tied into money. So that's where you got to recognize what are these things that are creeping into habits, especially now when we live at such an unknown time. Recognize what are things that you're doing. Where are you impulsively spending your money so that you can put a short circuit in there? And the way to put a short circuit in there is to reframe it and go, well, okay, I'm afraid of losing my job, but I'm safe right now. Like, I'm okay. So that you can start to take a few deep breaths and center yourself and calm and go, okay, that's something I'm imagining might happen. So yeah, so you start off, and I'll summarize it back again. So it's about, first of all, identifying what it is that we're feeling, what it is that we're experiencing, what are the money stories that we tell ourselves. Money doesn't grow on trees. I could never go find that job, or whatever it is. start to identify how we respond when we're feeling stressed, anxious, disappointed, whatever it is. And then start to look at how do we reframe the story that we're telling ourselves, and what is something else that I could do in its place that might actually be more productive to get me to where I want to go. So maybe instead of having a glass of wine, I'll call up a friend and have that connection with the person and start to feel better about it and shift my thinking rather than reading the negative news and just, you know, drinking my sorrows away, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So one of the resources that we will put in the handout is from Wire, and it's a list of questions that help you identify your money story. And I think some of it is what you've been talking about, just becoming aware of how things were for you as a child and maybe what you heard from parents or other important people in your life, society around you and what it said about money and where you came from. And then it sounds like you're saying now as adults, this is our opportunity to really examine how we're feeling emotionally, and then to look at the habit that's associated with that and to be able to reframe that.
Yep, spot on.
Yeah.
And something that you need to realize, I'd like to talk about financial stress for a moment as part of that, is you need to recognize that as human beings, we have a naturally strong stress response to money, which is actually in many cases misplaced. So why do we have a natural stress response? Because we associate money with survival. So if you think about it, you need money to buy food, you need money to have a roof over your head, to have a warm place to sleep at night. So, but our subconscious mind doesn't know to differentiate between, you know, I need money to buy food and I need to be able to survive versus, you know, well, I just got an unexpected bill in the mail that I wasn't planning on, but I'll find a way to pay that off, right? So we will then experience that stress as if our life depended on it. So again, recognize that's why now everyone is part of the pandemic and the recession and the negative news stories, we are freaking out. If you consider any time you lost your phone or your wallet, even if just for a minute, you've gone into that, your instinctive brain took over and you've gone into a panic mode, even though your life didn't depend on it. No one has a gun to your head. It's not literally a life threat, but you're experiencing it as though it is, because we associate money with our survival. So anything money related will instantly get us to overreact. So we need to get really good at taking a few deep breaths to calm our nervous system down and to start to consciously reframe it and go, actually, that's not a life and death situation. Even if I lose my job, again, there'll be ways that I'll be okay. There's things that I can do and I will still be okay. Now, the reason that it's important for us to get sort of a grip on that, so to speak, is because first of all, when we're stressed, it's going to affect us on a number of levels. We won't be able to sleep as well. We'll have more arguments. We will be more prone to binge drinking and eating and retail therapy and all that sort of stuff. So these are all things that aren't going to serve us. If we're not eating well, if we're not exercising, if we're emotionally drained from all the stress, that will have an impact on our physical health, which will also cost us money. But also research has found that when we're stressed, we don't perform as well as we would otherwise. We don't think as well as we would otherwise, and we don't solve problems as well as we would otherwise. So again, it seems almost counterintuitive, but it's like you stressing out about losing your job is actually going to make it harder for you to find that job. You need to put yourself back in a position where you know that you will be okay, so that you can prepare a backup plan from a position of feeling safe and secure rather than from a position of feeling panicked.
Makes sense. So why do you think that debt and financial stress is such an issue even in a wealthy country like Australia? And why is it that budgeting is easier said than done?
Yeah, so it comes back to that wiring. So what you may not realize is that as human beings have evolved, we've actually developed 3 brains, right? So when we think of our mind, there's actually 3 brains in that are sort of fighting for control in a sense. So our neocortex, which is our outer layer, that thinking brain, I don't know if you've heard sort of people anecdotally saying we only use about 5% of our brain's capacity. They're actually talking about that. So that brain from an evolutionary standpoint is so new to us. We haven't learned how to tap into it. So only about 5% of the decisions that we make day to day come from that logical place. The rest of them are being driven by our emotions, by our habits, and also by our primal brain, which is where that fight, flight, or freeze response, that fear response comes into it. So when people struggle about it, and this is why, and they've found, you can be a millionaire, you can be a billionaire, it doesn't matter how much money you have. Again, that sense of happiness isn't there from a financial standpoint. There's always something else that we're striving for and a way that we're comparing ourselves of being less than. But also that stress response is still there because it's anything money related. So I could have $1 million in the bank and I'm still going to freak out if I lose a business deal or if, something, unexpected bills comes in or the car breaks down and I wasn't planning for it, right? We'll just naturally have that response. Now, so for most people, we struggle because I mentioned earlier that money, and especially in its current form, is so new from an evolutionary standpoint. Our minds haven't caught up to how we manage that. So we actually have a lot of instinctive behaviors that have served us well through evolution, but actually sabotage us when it comes to how we manage our money. And I'll give you an example. So we have a tendency to follow the pack, right? Historically, there's been a safety in numbers from doing what everyone else is doing. But consider if you apply that in the world of investing, right? How do you make money in investment markets? It's by buying low and selling high, which means you have to be making those moves at the opposite time of everyone else. When everyone else is panicking and selling, you have to be buying more. When everyone else is buying, that's the time to sell. And we saw that play out with Bitcoin recently. If you missed that, go and look up Bitcoin in the news and see what happened. But again, we had that, what was known as like the Bitcoin craze, where people who had never invested before, who didn't even know what Bitcoin was, started investing in it because they heard about it on the news, because they saw other people going and doing it and making money from it. So we then started following the pack. But unfortunately for those people, then what they were doing is they were buying at the peak of the market. And not long after that, the bubble burst in a sense and the value of Bitcoin dropped. So that's an example of us in action where evolution has taught us this safety in doing what the crowd is doing. But when it comes to money, the opposite is true. And that's the sort of thing that drives so many people in Australia, for example, to go and have high levels of debt. We overextend ourselves financially. It doesn't matter how much we earn, we still overextend ourselves. And that is because, again, it's that peer pressure. And social media applies that peer pressure so well because it's like, well, here's the holiday we've gone on. Here's the house that we live in. Here's the car that we drive. So there's that pressure to do what everyone else is doing. Gosh, if I earn a certain amount of money or if I have a particular title, from a career point of view, what are people going to think if I'm driving pardon my French, a shitty old car? So I feel like I'm going to be the odd sheep in that. So our instinct is to do what the crowd is doing. But math tells us, when you're about to start a family, your income is going to drop, your expenses are increasing. This is not the time to be upsizing the house or the car. But it's not about math. We do what our instinct tells us to do. And our instinct tells us to do, there's safety. Everyone else is doing it. There's safety in doing what everyone else is doing. So we have, we could do an entire day on biases, but I'll give you one last one, which is a prime example as well of how our biases can work against us with managing our money. So we have what's known as status quo bias, which is to say that we like sticking with how things are. Again, think about it. From an evolutionary point of view, the known danger, it's safe because you know what it's like. Making change, that's risky, right? So we don't like to make change in any way. So, if you don't shop around for your bills on a regular basis and you're telling yourself, oh, I don't have time or it won't save me enough money, that's actually your conscious mind trying to rationalize it. But in actual fact, you don't like change. Right? So, and retailers then use that to their advantage. So they'll give us a good deal to lure us in. Again, they know we need a good incentive to sort of get in. And then they'll start to jack up the prices little by little over time rather than rewarding you for your loyalty. Because they know, odds are, you're just going to put up with it. Finder, I think it was, or Moza, one of the comparison sites, did a study a couple of years ago where they surveyed a group of people and said, look, if you knew you stood to save, we found that if you switch energy providers, you would save $1,000. Will you switch? Something, I think it was like 78%, a massive number of people would not switch, even if it meant that they would save $1,000. We would rather turn the lights off, you know, drop down the heater at home and sort of put a jumper on kind of thing. We would rather, or we would put up with it. But most people wouldn't switch even with such an incentive like that. So you have to recognize that you have those biases in place and you have to work to consciously override them. Now, the beauty of the human mind is that our brains are what's called plastic. There's, again, a field of research focused on looking at neuroplasticity of the brain. And what they found is, so if we're consciously aware of habits and beliefs and things that we're doing, don't say to yourself that you'll be forever stuck that way, because it's not true. If you take conscious effort to override that instinct, yes, you'll have to make an effort for a little while to consciously keep overriding it. But over time, you'll form like a new pathway, and that will start to be your new way of being. So there's power in our minds. We can go, while we may have been not positioned in the ideal way for managing our money, if we're consciously aware of it, we can override it, and there's power there, and we can start to shift things for the better, which is, you know, such a more empowering way to think about it, rather than going, you know what, well, it's out of my hands. This is how it's always been. There's not much more I can do. You can.
That's great. That's a really aha moment for me. And I love what you've said about the neural pathways, because I think you can spend time beating yourself up. And I can relate to that story of not changing, even though you know you might save $1,000. This is just this element of, oh God, I have to do this, I have to do that. But you're absolutely right. It's like saying to yourself and challenging yourself that this is just a different way of approaching things, and becoming conscious of money and where it's going, and bringing your awareness to that will kind of almost like fire new neural pathways, and you will get better at this.
Yep. And there's one more bias as well, which we have to be mindful of, especially now in times of the pandemic, and these stories on social media makes it, again, that much easier for us to fall into that trap, is we have a thing called confirmation bias as well, which again is from a survival point of view. We feel safety, and it's better for us if we have that confirmation that our way of viewing the world is correct. Now, the danger with that is if your way of viewing the world is that this is as good as it gets, if we are doomed because of the recession and the pandemic, it's just going to be impossible to get a new job, there's no point starting a business right now, it ain't going to work, you are naturally going to instinctively want to surround yourself by people that reinforce that belief, right? And you'll read more news stories about that and all that sort of thing, which will just go, you see, I told you so, I was right. Now, social media makes it tricky, because if you click on these stories, it's automatically going to start feeding you more of those as well. You won't even have to look for it. Suddenly your feed is just going to be a one-sided view of the world. So again, you want to be aware of that, be careful about that, and go, you know what, I'm not going to buy into that. If I want to change things, well, then I need to surround myself by people that will empower me to do that. I'm going to read articles, join Facebook groups, talk to friends and family, people who are yes people, who will say, yes, you can go and do that, right? Rather than surrounding yourself with the naysayers. Because if you're not careful, you'll instinctively want to do that because it makes you feel safe. So, and with the news stories as well, you know, just tune out of it. I know we get hooked on the almost, how many updates do we get in a day? I've lost track now of the COVID numbers and the updates and all that. So the more we focus on things outside of our control, the more stress we're going to feel, the more anxious we'll feel, the more powerless we feel. I've now actively tuned out from all of that. I don't click on those stories. I don't follow that, so that the notifications start to drop off. Because you know what, if you get an update once a week, you'll be informed enough to know what's going on, okay? You don't have to be the expert on pandemic numbers right now. It's not helping you, it's not serving you. Instead, focus your mind and your efforts on things that are within your control. Even the simplest of things like, what am I eating today? What am I watching today? Who am I talking to today? Stuff that's directly in your control. Just focus on that. As they say, mind your own business. Just focus on stuff that's relevant to you. And we'll come out of this and you'll be okay, and you'll find that you've even prospered through this, right? It can be hard to imagine, but it is possible. Just don't buy into the negative talk.
Yeah. That's fantastic. A really good reminder, because you're absolutely right with the algorithms that you can put something in a Google search and then suddenly you're getting a ton of Google ads about it. So yeah, I can totally relate to that. Just touching back on something I think we talked about a little bit earlier, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about why you think as women, we don't talk about money more openly.
Well, look, and it's something as a society that we don't either, because we have been conditioned that our net worth equates our self-worth. So if you stop and think about it, there's so much emotion tied to how much money we have. And if we were to talk about money, that leaves us exposed. It's like, well, what are people going to think about me? Are they going to think I'm dumb because I don't earn more? Are they going to judge me? If I have more money, are people going to want to take advantage of me? Are people going to get jealous? Are people, there's a lot of fear, even when women go to see their accountant, there's that fear of judgment. Am I going to be judged for how I've managed my money and the choices that I've been making? So all of that ties into it. So we don't want to talk about it. It's funny, the ABC did an interview a couple of years ago, funnily enough, in the streets of Melbourne. They stopped complete strangers in the street. Camera was there. And they said, look, can you tell us your most embarrassing medical stories? And people were willing to share the most private, personal stuff, not a problem. Then they went and asked them, they said, how much do you earn? Not a single person was willing to answer that question. So it goes to show you how much, and it ties so closely to how we perceive ourselves. So yeah, that's why we don't want to talk about it. And that's why it's important that we do start talking more about that sort of stuff in a community, start talking more as a family, because that will bring you closer together as well as a couple and as family members. But also for your kids, it helps them have context around what's going on, so that they aren't repeating the same patterns that we're repeating. They start to realize that, hey, if you learned your level of stress and anxiety from your parents, it's understandable, because they were going through a war, they were going through a different time, they were going through the Great Depression, for example. So your kids don't have to go through that, and you can go to them, you know what, I'm stressing out about it, but actually I shouldn't, because we're safe and we're okay, and this is how we're going to deal with it. And that will give them so much more power, so that they don't do the same stuff that we did.
I think that's a really important point, how we help our children create money stories that are going to serve them well for the future, particularly with all the different sorts of times that we've got ahead of us post-pandemic. So I think that's a really good point you make. Do you have any other tips around that, Natasha, around how you would speak with children around money? I know that's a bit off topic, but I think it's a fascinating one.
Look, it's by catching yourself and being aware. So my husband will sometimes, because he gets sick of my son asking for the billionth time, why can't I have a Matchbox car, right? And he'll sometimes then, out of frustration, because he's run out of different answers, go, look, because we don't have money, because we're broke, whatever. And I'm like, no, don't say that. He will take that literally, because he doesn't know. If he goes, we don't have money, right? So we want to be teaching them about control and making choices. And we also have to be careful. This is one that I struggle with, because as parents, we want to give them everything, right? But they, first of all, as human beings, we're naturally more motivated by instant gratification. And they have grown up in a time where technology and everything is at their fingertips. It's like, I think of something, I can go and get it. That piece of information, that video game, whatever it is, I can get it instantly. So we have to be mindful of that, so that we aren't enabling that further. So I have to stop myself, even with basic stuff, where my son asks for a drink, that I go, okay, I'm not going to run and get it straight away. He needs to learn some patience. He needs to learn that, not everything will happen instantaneously, and not to get worked up and disappointed by that either. So it can be a hard one, because you can start to sort of get worried. Am I teaching them? Where's the balance between reality check and limiting belief, right? And I think it's just with the way that we position it. So if we teach them about making different choices and going, well, okay, we've got $10 today that we've allocated that we can go and spend on buying something. So you can go and buy that toy, but then there's no McDonald's. Which would you rather, right? That starts to teach them more about having to make choices, because I think that's really important. A lot of adults these days struggle with debt and that sort of stuff, because we've lost that ability to self-regulate and to have that control and make choices. Credit cards make it really easy to go, well, why not have both? And the messaging says it to us because, and they know it's about our self-worth. How much of the messaging is about because you're worth it, right? Because it's priceless. How much is that experience? I saw one, which is a woman, I think it was a MasterCard ad, where they showed her trying to make her boyfriend jealous or her ex-boyfriend jealous. And they were like, you know, putting the price tag on, you know, the designer handbag costs this much and the outfit costs this much and the lippy costs that much. But, you know, the look on your ex-boyfriend's face, priceless, right? So we have all that messaging. We need to be aware of it and sort of push back on it and go, you know what, that's clever marketing, but that is not reality. And we need to teach our kids as well. That's not reality.
Absolutely. So, Natasha, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I was wondering if we could spend a bit of time talking about what you think is key for women surviving and thriving in a recession and a pandemic.
Yeah, so as we've spoken about, we've got the mental load already, and especially if you're in places like Melbourne where there's lockdown and you're trying to homeschool and hang on to your career as well. Again, being aware that, you know what, we have outdated norms that say that this is our responsibility. We have outdated norms that say we have to be perfect in every way. I know so many mums that are stressing out over, well, how do I keep on top of the kids' homework? And there's so much stuff that we have to do. So recognizing that and going, you know what, it doesn't have to be perfect. And the world is not going to implode if one assignment doesn't get done or whatever it is. So figure out what it is that's giving you the most stress and pressure and address it head on. So whether that's by talking to the teachers to find out, hey, you know, what's the implication if we don't do this stuff? What's the 3 basic things that we can focus on each day, and can we leave the rest? You know, address it head on. If you have people that you're living with, if you have a spouse or someone who can support you, let them do that, and recognize that people aren't mind readers, especially men. So rather than us falling into that trap of, if he loved me, he would do more, we need to recognize we both have different conditioning. Let's just put that to the side and speak up and go, you know what, I need help with this. Can you go and do that so I can go and do that? So giving us permission to then, you know, underperform with the way that we would view it, right? Because we're not being perfect, we're not being everywhere at once. Recognize you're a human being. There's only so much you can get done in one day, and prioritize what's really important rather than trying to do all of it. Financially, there's a lot of opportunity for all of us to get ahead. Hey, we've just been forced out of spending, right? So if you're at a point where it's like you're not going out, we're not driving around as much, we're not paying for parking, for a little while we weren't paying for childcare. If you have a habit of going and buying lunch at work, you know, on a regular basis, you know, you're not going out, so you're not doing that. So use that as an opportunity, to form new habits. So if you used to get takeaway a lot, well, now's the time to discover your love of cooking, right? But also that money that we're not spending, put it away right now. Start to use it as a time to learn new ways so that you're spending less, and start to accumulate and save right now. Because I see so many people that are missing out on that opportunity, because again, our emotional state is causing us to overspend, and we're spending stuff on improving how the home looks or buying something, but we need to acknowledge that it's actually coming from filling an emotional need. It's retail therapy. So we need to stop that in its tracks and take advantage of what's out there. And just, you know, there's so many great initiatives and venues like the council as well, what you guys are doing today. There's so much support that's available. So not being afraid to reach out and ask for help and speak up, because these are uncertain times. It's okay to feel like a fish out of water, and it's okay to feel stressed and anxious, because hey, the media is pummeling that idea into us. So reach out for that support and give yourself a break. You know, it'll be okay.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. And just on that, I do want to say that Rachel has put a list of, I'm just scrolling up the chat, she's put a list of community organisations, pardon me, that are there to help, like Lifeline and Beyond Blue. So there are phone numbers and some websites there if people want to go into the chat and have a look at that. Because yes, we do want to acknowledge this is a really stressful, unprecedented, once in a 100-year type situation, and that everybody is just sort of doing the best they can to support themselves and their family. So, Natasha, did you have any final things you wanted to say before we just have a little look for some questions? And if you have questions, now would be a good time to pop them in the Q&A.
Look, I think we have covered quite a bit of ground here. So obviously, if you would like to learn more, you can look up Women with Sense. There's a ton of free resources on there. And don't forget to check out Wonder Woman's Guide to Money. There's practical stuff in there, not just about how to manage cash flow and mindset, but also around superannuation and investing and all the rest. So, you know, you can take advantage of while we're not able to drive around and do all those sorts of things, we can slow down a little bit and take time to learn some new skills. So yeah,
absolutely. And we will be sending out, along with this recording, we'll send out a bit of an information sheet that will have some resources on there, so you can also have a look at that. I think we will just take a moment to check over into the questions and see if there's anything in here. There's been some comments, more or less confirming what we've been talking about, and some comments around cold communities, cultural and language barriers add extra difficulties when you're in a relationship, and rights and responsibilities across all genders, which is right. So a bit of a comment there. Yeah, and I will just check in the chat. Oh, there's been a bit of action in the chat. So a lot of people speaking about migrant women, and great comment here. Often with migrant women, and I am one, I just make them repeat, I can work, I can save, I can decide what I need to do with my money, I can have an account of my own. So
yeah, it's such a big one. You know, I remember, and my parents have been quite supportive, you know, from that upbringing point of view. You know, my dad was pushing me to do software development, you know, in the 90s where there were no women in IT, right? So on the one hand, they were really progressive, but on the other hand, you know, I remember my grandmother and my family members, anytime we had guests, the, you know, proud and traditional thing to do would be to bring out your eligible daughter or granddaughter. And I was, you know, just a teenager. And every time we had guests, I'd come out, you know, with the tray of the goods. I'd make the coffee and all that, because it was like, here, you know, we're positioning her for, here's an eligible bride for when, you know, someone's there, someone's there to take it. So there was all that subconscious stuff around, look, my role really is to be, you know, the cook and the provider and the housekeeper and all the rest. And it took a while to let go of that guilt, you know, for ages when my husband, when I went, you know what, oh my gosh, I'm turning into mum who lays out dad's clothes and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, nope, I'm not going to criticize. Are you really going to wear that outfit? Do you think you should iron that? I was like, no. And when we moved in together, straight away, I started doing more of the housework and I stepped back from it. But the guilt was amazing. You know, if my husband would go and put his own laundry in the wash or was ironing something of his own, or hey, picked up a vacuum cleaner, I would immediately run up to go and help because I'd feel guilty. Like I'm somehow, you know, I'm asleep on the job. So, hey, he's had to go and step up. And I had to work for a long time to consciously change that story and go, hey, he's an adult. He contributes to the house. You know, him doing housework is a good thing. It doesn't mean that I'm a slack mum or a wife or whatever it is. But there's so much of that generational conditioning. It takes a while to let it go and give yourself permission to let it go. But hey, the more we talk like this,
yeah,
the easier it's going to be.
Agree with you 100%. And it's been wonderful today to talk to you, Natasha, about your story, but also the story of lots of women out there today, and how it's a really good thing if we can take some time, with life being slightly slower for some of us, not all of us, obviously. There's a lot of stuff going on for a lot of women at the moment. But taking some moments to just really look at our own money stories and how it is that we've come to get those, and really starting to question them if we haven't already done so, and looking at the impact that they have on us. So thank you so much, Natasha. It's been lovely to have you here. And I just want to say I'll be sending all of our registrants today an email with a short survey, and as I said, a link to the recording. It'd be great if you could complete the survey for us, because it does help us to establish that these sorts of sessions are useful to women. And if you've enjoyed this session today, please share the link to Eventbrite. There are still more sessions to come. We have 4 more sessions coming up over the next 2 weeks. We have a session next Tuesday on young women and money. Next Thursday, the 27th, there is a session on financial pressures during COVID. So that's specifically very much around if you're in a very difficult financial position or you have people that you love who are, some resources and information to assist them. A session the following week, Tuesday the 1st of September, which is on women approaching retirement and superannuation, which we know is of great interest with people's super accounts going mostly down at the moment. And Wednesday the 2nd of September, I'll be back with Natasha for another session on making smart investment decisions, which I'm very much looking forward to that. So you will have another opportunity, if you've enjoyed Natasha presenting today, to hear her again. So we know that building your financial well-being is a never-ending journey. So please check out all the resources that you can find, the resources that we will send you. And thank you, Natasha. And we will look forward. Sorry, I'll let you say goodbye.
I was just going to say thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to chat to you. We've had such a great turnout, and I love seeing what's going on in the chat. So it's great to see that, you know, everyone is being so engaged and that this was really resonating with everyone. So thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I will now we're going to sign off, but I will say thanks so much, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.